Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. The higher education sector is fiercely competitive. Universities play a central role in delivering the workforce of tomorrow. Yet technological advances have led to dramatic shifts in the skills demands. Consequently, universities have needed to acquire the ability to be able to evolve at an accelerated pace. In terms of education, they deliver and the role they play in society. This has a direct relevance to the digital capability a university possesses to market itself to potential students, businesses and research partners, and also to participate in knowledge transfer. Drupal is amongst the CMSs chosen by higher education across the globe, and particularly in the United Kingdom, and is central to their digital transformation strategies. Thanks to the convenience of this virtual conference, unusually leaders from UK universities that have most generously agreed to take time out of their busy schedules to be with us today to discuss the central role of Drupal in higher education. So first of all, Adrian, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe tell us about the University of West London?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm Adrian Ellison. I'm Associate Pro Vice-Chancellor and Chief Information Officer here at UWL. For those that don't know, West London, if you are ever driving from Heathrow Airport into the centre of London along the M4 motorway, we have the first tower block on the left-hand side as you enter London. We've got about 15,000 students, focused mainly on our campuses in West London, but we have a global reach now with satellite campuses in the United Arab Emirates, out into China and other parts of Asia as well.
Thank you. Iain, welcome to DrupalCon. Likewise, can you introduce yourself and the business school?
Sure. Hi, my name's Iain Harper. I've been at the business school for 3 years. No background in higher education before that. I've worked mainly in financial services and a bit of time in government for the government digital service. So I guess many of you, if not most of you, will have heard of Oxford University. The university is getting on for 1,000 years old. The business school is a bit younger, 25 years old. So what we aim to do is sort of reflect that kind of prestige of the university, but obviously more cutting edge aspects that people come to the business school to learn about, being kind of future business leaders. I guess from a technology point of view, we are, I would say, mostly autonomous in the sense that we have our own kind of systems and data strategy. We're not sort of completely we don't have to sort of adhere too closely to university kind of processes and what have you. So we have quite a large degree of autonomy to implement our kind of our technology stacks across sort of customer experience and marketing, recognizing the fact that whereas the university as a whole doesn't really have to market itself too hard, the business school is in an incredibly competitive commercial space. So we really have to be on top of our game when it comes to sort of our systems.
Thanks, Iain. And finally, Nick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Manchester Met?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Nick Holland. I'm the head of digital at Manchester Metropolitan University, as the name implies, in the great city of Manchester. We're one of the largest UK universities with over 30,000 students, and we have a vast, and I think it's fair to say in many areas, a disparate group of websites which form our digital estate. We launched our new Drupal platform in May this year with a very clear remit to bring this digital estate together and to very much empower our content owners to do what they needed to do in terms of communicating and engaging with our various stakeholders. My background, I was 20 years agency side, and I've been in the higher education sector for the past 3 years since I took up the role of head of digital at Manchester Met. As has been alluded to, it's a very vibrant sector. It's an ever-changing sector. and there's always a lot to do and a lot to look forward to. So that's me.
Great stuff. So as we can see, a very diverse range of audiences, very different universities being represented in the panel. So let's begin with you, Adrian. You've nearly completed a program to migrate from Drupal 7. Can I ask you what led to deciding to remain with Drupal, how you've gone about the phased migration, and what attributes were most important in achieving in the new CMS?
Yeah, Paul. So it was an obvious choice, really, to stay with Drupal. We had a well-established Drupal 7 platform, and we moved to Drupal 8. I mean, the key attributes around Drupal: it's a very flexible, fully functional, feature-rich platform. Public sector organization in many ways, not being open source and not having huge licensing fees attached to it are attractive. I mean, we did go out and, of course, look at the market when we were going through procurement, but for us, it was a reasonably easy decision to make to stay with Drupal. In terms of replacing our main university website, and I'll go back to the point you made in your introduction, universities are now fiercely competitive. So having a top website is absolutely critical to the university's business. I mean, we used to talk about it being our shop window, and it is so much more than that. So I think the first thing that we had to do was to be very clear about what we wanted to get out of the website as a platform, and it had to be wholly student focused. It had to, and it serves many purposes, and that, I think, is another challenge with university websites. The main tool might be to recruit students, but we have so many different audiences for our website. Those looking for research expertise, those looking to engage with us for consultancy or more commercial areas, possibly even just renting building space, right the way through to engaging with our local community. We are a big organisation within the West London area. So for us, it was about being clear what the requirements were. And when we were focused on the student experience, we wanted real consistency. We wanted to be able to give prospective students the ability to compare and contrast courses with a huge course offering. And I'm sure my colleagues will talk about that as well. So condensing often what is very complex knowledge. And of course, HE, higher education, is now highly regulated. We have the Office for Students regulating us, but we're also now, like everybody else, bound by the Competition and Markets Authority. So having really clear information that's consistent, well presented, was a main requirement. So that's what we set out to achieve. We had some thought about, do we go for a big bang, do all of the development and launch the website as a big bang, a new look UWL. But we decided there was too much risk with that. We wouldn't get the benefits that we could get by a more staged process. So we did adopt a staged process to replace Drupal 7, focused initially around that whole student recruitment piece, so the shop window of all of our courses, an enormous piece of work, and that has to be sort of connected to and back-ended to our curriculum management systems, our student record systems, so a huge amount of work in that. But that was phase one, and that went live a few years ago and transformed actually student recruitment. So we met our objectives with that. And then a gradual phase of bringing on more functionality, moving from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 in waves that could be very carefully controlled, very carefully choreographed, and then brought into the live environment. And that's worked very well for us.
That's very interesting, and you picked up some themes which we'll drill into later in the session. Thank you. Nick, in May this year, amidst the global pandemic, you launched a modern Drupal platform. How did you go about building a business case to move from your previous platform, and what were the strategic goals?
Yeah, so yes, in May. I mean, I think one of the key things which we'll probably all recognise in our industry is that remote working is a lot easier. So I think whilst there's obvious challenges, I don't think the actual pandemic per se, in terms of the program activity that we were working on, was hugely impacting. To go back to your point around building the business case, I think it's the same as every kind of business case, really, in that you start to understand where the business has requirements, and that's shaped and influenced by various stakeholders that talk to you. You clearly look at metrics and your objectives to go forward. And basically with all the key players, so the director of marketing, various significant senior content owners and so on, to shape a kind of vision around where you want to be, at which point you can then start to understand what the future roadmap needs to look like. And once you've got to that stage, it's then about going through the formal process of moving through the needs analysis, and really convincing those people that are going to sign off on what is a significant project to actually to buy into that, and then commission all the various steps that need to happen to get this project up and running. In terms of objectives, I mean, I recognised a lot of what Adrian said there from our own work that we've done, but I'm going to pick out two objectives that we had particularly. The first was sustainability, and the second was greater federation of content ownership. So, talk about sustainability. I mean, Adrian talked about the big bang. I mean, we concluded very quickly that you couldn't do a big bang for the scale of our digital estate. By the time we'd done it, it'd be out of date again. So we had to go for that iterative process. But that's kind of where the legacy challenges are. So even before we launched, some of our more recently adapted pages were very, very good, really having an impact. But then you'd got that long tail of perhaps technical debt, but also legacy content and so on. So we really needed to be building up a system that meant that even as we went through the process of updating, that things didn't fall so far behind that, you know, you'd very much got 10 websites in one because of when you'd recently done it. So that was one of our key drivers going forward. And I mean, sustainability is a broad topic that you can't get into in too much detail. But the second area that we looked at was about federating content ownership and the ability for our content owners to build on this website. And that's all the elements you'd imagine around governance and so on. But it's about making sure that there's a baseline of quality and a baseline ability for non-technical people to be able to produce a great website. And I think they're probably the two biggest drivers for us. I mean, we set out standard, obviously in terms of the commercial objectives, but I think as a core kind of digital objective, those are the two primary ones.
Brilliant. So whilst Nick and Adrian, you've both recently launched platforms, Iain, the business school's been on Drupal 8 for quite some time. In fact, you moved across relatively early. Can you perhaps talk about the process around that and what's changed in the period since?
So I guess we did a couple of years ago now, we did a major sort of replatforming of the school's main customer-facing website, and we really sort of completely cut and started again from scratch. We had a choice at that point to use D7 or D8, and D8 was pretty new at the time, so there was some hesitance to go down the D8 route. But I guess from my perspective, I kind of felt that it didn't make any sense really to do a brand new site on D7 that would only have to be sort of moved across at a relatively short space of time after we'd launched it. So yeah, I mean, I guess we really used the project as a kind of springboard to get much sort of better control of our kind of content management. So introduce the concept of every piece of content on the website having, a specific owner, and also a specific review date. So depending on what content that is, some of the sort of, COVID content, for instance, would get reviewed maybe even on a weekly basis. It might not get changed, but there's this concept that no content kind of stagnates and gets forgotten about. And if we get to a review date and it's no longer needed, then we'll just unpublish it. So Drupal's been really kind of key to us doing that. And also, I guess we took the opportunity to really overhaul, I guess, the marketing technology that sits beneath the site. So we're using forms that link directly into our CRM now. Google Analytics 360 is meshed with the site as well.
So really, this has been a process of perhaps introducing a bit more improved governance around the content as much as anything, and perhaps a maturity of the organisation from a digital perspective. Yeah, I mean, we have environmentally friendly lights that like to turn off in opportune moments. It's strange being back in the office, actually. But yeah, like a lot of people, the sort of the situation that prompted this redevelopment was very much a kind of an underloved site where content had just kind of built up like barnacles on a ship, and started to sort of really drag down the overall kind of information architecture, layering more stuff on and never taking anything away. So we took what at the time I think was somewhat controversial decision, that there was no automatic transfer path from the old site, and we used a tool called Gather Content as a sort of interstitial mechanism to sort of almost enforce people to actually question whether this content was really needed, and also the fact that in many cases it needed to be completely rewritten. So we reduced the amount of content on the new site. I think it was sort of between sort of 40 and 50%. So it was a massive shrinking in terms of the size, and really a lot of that was just getting rid of stuff that no one had really owned before and had just sort of stagnated and was just providing a dead weight on the site as a whole. Yeah, I think that's a common theme across lots of universities. There's a lot of legacy content out there, oftentimes 2 pieces or 3 pieces of content doing the same job. Adrian?
Yeah, and I think it's the academic side. Academics never want to sort of get rid of anything, and you sort of see the archetypal academics office. It's floor to ceiling with stuff. And I think the website had become a bit like that.
But it's part of the challenge, isn't it? How do you assign value to a page? Because analytics only tells one picture, doesn't it, around the value and so on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like most university websites, student recruitment gets a huge focus. But we've got some hugely valuable content within our research section, which if you're in that sector and that research is part of your niche, then it's hugely valuable. And trying to work through that so that you can get a sort of clear model around that is crucial.
Yeah, these important pages, they have low traffic, but they have high value.
Absolutely.
Research is a classic example of that. I would say we've certainly been around that track and I think that's where, having an owner of it who can make a regular sort of qualitative decision about, okay, analytics might be low, but this is unique in the sphere of whatever research it might be, so it stays. And what you're sort of putting a stop to is content that maybe doesn't have high traffic or particularly high value, but just no one's tasked with making a decision whether that goes or stays, and probably it should go.
Let's stick on this theme. Quite oftentimes you'll come across in any university contrasting opinions, and they're quite firmly held. How do each of you go about trying to counter the so-called expert in the room? Because of course a lot of universities are full of researchers, or the highest paid individual. Adrian, do you have any ideas around that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was Well, first of all, we broke our web replacement down into very discrete chunks. So we were very clear about what each stage needed to achieve as an outcome. And each stage had a group of stakeholders that were part of that chunk. So engagement with stakeholders, putting in very tight controls around the project delivery method. So we were able to very clearly articulate what the output was. So setting expectations right from the get-go, trying to head off those surprises. And I think the biggest thing that we did was to put some very strong yet quite light governance around the whole project delivery. I think everybody is now used to having, some form of formal project management, and whether you want Prince 2, Light, Agile, whatever it is. And we formed a project board, and universities have a habit of making project boards hugely unwieldy, sort of forms of governance. Well, we didn't. We kept it to the very bare minimum. We had a project board of 5 people. That's the senior owner, so an executive of the university, to make those executive decisions. I was on it. Our head of marketing and comms was on it. They owned the website. And then we had the project manager and the specialist in that area. And that's all we needed to really make the decisions. So once we were clear about what the objectives were, and we had very tight deadlines, which were, absolute things. So phase 1 was all geared around the summer recruitment and what we call clearing. That was an immovable date. So it absolutely focused everybody's mind. So decisions were made quickly, efficiently, and then communicated down to the project team, having a very tightly controlled and very well working project delivery team, working with our suppliers as well, so that we could develop, we could test, we could refine, and then we could release, sign off, round of applause, move on to the next one, and that's how we did it.
So it's relatively small teams, early success, and repeat.
Yeah.
Iain, I believe you employ some very interesting tactics around data-driven decision making to counter some opinionation in the organisation.
Yeah, I can remember the low point, which was when the person who shall remain nameless put off a large swathe of the Harvard website for my perusal as how a guide to how we might want to develop our site, which was that was a low point. But I guess what I've done is sort of borrow a mantra from the old GDS days, which is that we make decisions with data. So I think certainly at the school, and I can't speak for others, but there are a lot of opinions that tend to float around, and how we've tried to move through that is that we've got various sort of technologies, be it multivariate testing, be it recording sessions and heat maps, be it Google Analytics. So, we've got reams of data about how our customers are actually using the website, both quantitative and qualitative. So how we approach, new pieces of development really is to just look at all of the data that we've got, which often will sort of point us in the right direction. And then we will put, a number of variations into tests, and we will let our customers kind of decide which works best. And that was a very sort of alien way of working to the school 3 years ago. But I think why it's worked is I think it's a methodology that academics can understand, and they can sort of see the rigor behind it. And it just helps us get past those sort of strong opinion conversations. Well, I think it should be like this. Well, I disagree. It should be like that. We say, well, let's try both, and and something else as well, and we'll let our customers tell us what actually works best for them. And that's been quite a sort of liberating methodology, because it sort of helps us with the academic side, because they can see it's a rigorous sort of methodology, and it also helps. No one necessarily has to be told they're wrong, because we just in a way outsource that decision making via multivariate testing to our customers.
Thank you. I mean, in contrast, Nick, with a platform that was being replaced, a lot of the decision making was through the appointment of single people, and also going through boards. Is that something you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Adrian mentioned it. You know, we are renowned for various governance levels within our sector and so on. We tried to keep it as tight as possible. We had two sort of formal groups. There was four in our kind of operational group. So myself, Director of Marketing, senior member from IT, and then the project manager. But then our sort of head governance board was had some Pro Vice-Chancellors and was chaired by one of the Pro Vice-Chancellors and so on. And it was really, in the early stages of the project, it was about defining what those groups were to do, and to make sure the discussions in the groups were purposeful. And that was quite a challenge, because, you know, we're a sector where we pay people to be opinionated and be individualistic and have their own individual requirements, yet we're trying to galvanise them into one sort of sustainable route based on a set of principles. So similarly, we were quite robust around our principles, but we also made sure they were flexible, so that they could accommodate things. And then it was about empowering the right people. And we built a whole project structure out from underneath those governance boards as well. But I think, you know, you need to work through that, and RACI models are crucial in terms of defining people's roles in the conversation to make sure that, you know, we're all opinionated, and, you know, you've got to take opinions on board, but decisions need to be made sometimes, and empowering the right people to make those decisions is obviously crucial in a major project. So,
and on a project of this scale, I mean, I understand that it's taken a couple of years or more to get from procurement all the way through to the release. Has the makeup of your team and your internal capacity changed at all? Have you had to hire anybody in order to deliver this project?
So I mean, it was 3 years. You know, in terms of, we talked about the business case, we went through an extensive process to evaluate our current website, and if I tell you that the output document of that was a few hundred pages, it gives you some kind of scale, and there's lots of interviews in that. And then the procurement process and so on took place, and I think it was probably 3 years from start to launch. During that, we did build out a project team. They reported into me, so they were part of the digital team as a structure, but nevertheless with a clearly defined remit. That project as such is finished, and a number of the project team have continued on in their functions and so on, and will continue on. But we're now subsuming that work into the continued migration into our general business as usual structure and processes. We, you know, throughout any academic year, we're always delivering projects to improve the website, and, you know, the ongoing work is now part of that, albeit to a greater significance than what would normally be the case.
So with the decisions that you're all making in the digital perspective, these are things which you're going to have to abide by for quite some time. They're, you know, non-trivial changes that you're making. Adrian, how do you go about making sure in the right decisions from a technology perspective without there being any introduction of bias either from an external supplier or an individual?
Yeah, I mean, Paul, that's a really good question, and it's the sort of question we all sort of think about when we set out our digital strategies, or IT strategies, whatever we call them these days. The thing for me is, it is always about the student, and I think over the last 9 months or so, we have probably had, you know, some of the most challenging times, but also perhaps some of the most technologically revolutionary times. I kind of joked when I was on a panel a few weeks ago at another event and said, you know, COVID, for all of the challenges that the world has faced, has helped us move our digital strategy on leaps and bounds. Because, you know, when we were setting ideas about how to do more online, how to get academic colleagues, some of who have only just recently mastered email, into, you know, a more virtual way of working, you know, I sort of set out a path that would take years for this to happen, and yet we managed to deliver it in the space of a week.
So what sort of things? How is that crystallised?
So what it means is, and you asked about technology decisions. So some of these were forced on us. We had no choice. We had to move the entire teaching estate, from physical to virtual. And then what you do is you make the best use of the tools that you've got. But of course, what you realize is that many of those tools are infinitely more capable than you were ever using them at the time. So for us, we have a virtual learning environment. It's not Drupal based. It's a proprietary product. But suddenly, mass use of that and using all the collaborative working tools within that, supported by the video conferencing platform. We happen to use Microsoft Teams. Other products are available out there, of course. And then suddenly everybody's being able to use these, whereas before there was a barrier. Well, I don't want to use Teams. Now you have to. It's the only way you're going to work with your colleagues. Just taking this back to Drupal for a moment, I mean, what we realized with COVID and really informed a strategic decision for us is, it's one thing moving your online learning to the online, but you have to move all of your support services as well. And that's where the website really came in. So many different parts of the university were trying to communicate to students about their offering, their support, their extra bit that they could do. And we very quickly realized we needed a central strategy that had nothing to do with technology. It was all about communications. And then we started a very targeted, very carefully choreographed weekly communication to students, just to keep them going, keep them on track, make sure we could signpost the right support services at the right time. And I think that probably more than anything else was the key thing for us to get us through the last 9 months.
So the flexibility of your new platform has been used to deliver a purpose that it was never initially intended to do.
Yeah.
How has that been with you, Nick? I mean, with the acceleration of change, have you seen any evidence of that?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, we were somewhat fortunate in that our IT function had probably similar to Adrian. We got that roadmap set out, so we kind of knew where we were going. The technologies that we would need to embrace were probably in our pipeline, being used to an extent, and we just had to rapidly accelerate that. And I mean, Teams is a clear example. We rolled out a program to move ourselves from Skype to Teams in the space of probably days, really, rather than what would have been naturally a year to do that, and so on. And then again, as Adrian said, the learning technology, just things like server scaling and making sure that was set up, and you're responsive to those needs, and that's okay as long as you've got the right people in place and the kind of the work is already in train. In terms of our website, again, I think we're very much similar to Adrian, that it was about facilitating comms, coordinating comms, a lot of people trying to communicate with students, making sure that there was no saturation and so on. So a lot of governance, and the technology just played a part in enabling that, really, and so on. So it was just important that we got an easy to use CMS, so that the comms team could just get in and do what they needed to when they needed to.
And I suppose they couldn't have arrived at a better time then.
Yeah.
I mean, Iain, I believe that the majority of your cohort comes from overseas. I imagine that you were probably affected even greater than the MMU or UWL. Perhaps you could talk about that and how you've had to adapt.
Sure, it's felt like every day we've been having to adapt to something, So, for example, our entire sort of on-campus executive education portfolio has had to move entirely online, from on-campus to online, and really at the drop of a hat, so we could accommodate the extra room we needed for some of our degree programs like the MBA and the executive MBA. So, entire teams have had to sort of pivot to a kind of not only online delivery of programs, but also a completely sort of different sales proposition. So yeah, I mean, it's been frenetic, but just to echo what the others have said is that, you know, the old cliche, don't let a good crisis go to waste. I think we've transformed a lot of the, I would say, sort of wraparound customer experience type things that I would say that we always got a kind of get out of jail free card when, you know, the IT service desk, which is absolutely amazing, could be there. But actually the underlying issue is that we have 5 separate logins for people. So, you know, actually sorting that out and, you know, actually driving into, without those sort of people to do the hands-on sort of first aid for what were often bad processes, we've had to really sort of drill down and try and sort a lot of those out.
So in many ways it's exposed some bottlenecks in systems and caused a reason to address those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because, you know, because we pre-COVID operated a, you know, at best a hybrid model, but, you know, largely a physical model. You know, people were coming to a building to do something, and if they had issues, there was someone on hand that could very quickly help them. All of that's sort of gone away. So, you know, we do obviously have students kind of in the building now, but that whole sort of emphasis of sort of physical first has kind of flipped on its head now, and it's sort of digital first. And, you know, we weren't really well set up to deal with that. So in the space of under a year, we've had to really kind of double down on addressing some of those digital first areas that were not as good as they needed to be because we'd been in a physical first world previously.
So interesting. You know, you talk about how you've had to change the content and, you know, major parts of your site. And I suppose this is a time where things might start to go a little bit ragged. Do you have measures in place to maintain consistency and to help content managers and the designers to maintain the brand and design over time?
We do. It is quite timely. So the university, as well as committing to a platform migration, committed to resourcing the full content design process. So we have a team now that's handling that migration. They are copywriters, content designers, and so on. So we're still in that phase. So we've still got a very hands-on mechanism for the sections that we're migrating. Obviously, since May, there's been a number of sections that are live, and so, you know, content owners are now getting to grips with this. I think it's as much about education as it is about training. So we have a training program, how to use the CMS and so on, and we have an education program about what makes good digital, and we have a whole community and intranet site set up to enable people to learn what makes for good digital practice, good content design, and just trying to infuse those things about writing user stories, really anchor yourself to user needs and so on. And it is filtering through, and obviously governance plays a part in that, in sort of being able to monitor and make sure you're maintaining standards, but it's also about driving it through an education piece as well to make sure that those that are tasked with delivering content on our estate are able to.
So it's quite common for universities to require their sites to address many diverse audiences, from, you know, business to academics to people in the local community. Adrian, what kind of research have you done, and how have you gone about addressing the needs of these diverse audiences?
Yeah, Paul, as I said at the start, I mean, university websites do have these diverse audiences. So we embarked on, you know, a program of research based on the phasing of each of the parts of the project to go out and talk to those key stakeholder groups. So we engaged with a group of prospective students. We went out to the market, spoke to 16, 17, 18-year-olds to see what they were looking at. We spoke our students' union. So a number of surveys as an example, just to make sure we understood what they were looking for in a website before we embarked on building one. And then once we got through that first, if you like, design phase, where we thought we'd come up with the right concept, absolutely critical to that was testing it. And again, we were able to find some willing student volunteers and put in a physical space and say, there's our new website. What do you think? How many did it take you to do what you thought you needed to do? Have we got it right? So I think that was key. And then engaging with each of those stakeholder groups, whether it was students, whether it was academic researchers, and going out. One of the things we did with our new website is we wanted to completely transform it in the sense of how much sort of rich media content. So every course we commissioned a video for, every research project, we're looking to sort of bring the research to life. Because it's not just research for the researchers, it's researchers for the general public, it's researchers for the media. And so there's so many different dimensions to this, but it is about really getting under the skin of the audience and the stakeholders so that we know we get it right before we do it.
That's really interesting. So very much a user-centered approach. We've not much time now, so I've got a big question for you all. So what features or capabilities do you think Drupal should have in the future that it currently lacks? Perhaps I'll go with Nick first.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's quite a tricky question for me because we've not really stumbled across much that we would say is the big ticket items that we need. How we're approaching it is, I think, similar to probably how everybody else has done it. We did the big discovery piece, and then we're doing smaller discovery and definition pieces, defining our requirements, and then building out the sections. And by and large, with some minor sort of tweaks, we're able to deliver what we need. I think in a year's time, when we've got through the kind of migration exercise and we're starting to look at the next big agendas for our website, then we will be looking, I think, just to reflect back, that one of the big transformations in terms of functionality that we didn't have, that we now have, and is starting to emerge, is around personalization.
Right.
And Drupal came along with a lot of tools to enable that, and then a bit of customization throughout the project delivery, and we're starting to get there with that. So I think reflecting back, that's probably one of the big things that we've seen tech-wise is very useful for us.
Brilliant. There's several solutions to that, and I hope Bruce is listening as well. Iain, have you any ideas?
Yeah, I guess one of the areas that we've felt that Drupal doesn't do amazingly well, and we actually use another third-party solution, is sort of its media library, and particularly in a kind of GDPR can be quite complex permissions around certain imagery and videos and stuff like that. The out-of-the-box Drupal media library, I think, it's functional, but I think that's an area that maybe I'd hope to see sort of the Drupal version, coming on in the future, hopefully to a point where we wouldn't necessarily need to have a kind of dedicated kind of solution for that, which has to be integrated with Drupal. So.
Yeah, that's a very, very common requirement. At least the media library is extensible, but it'd be good to see it moving on some strides. And then finally, Adrian.
Well, I mean, I'll agree with what Nick and Iain have said. I mean, for us, it's about making our website much more interactive and engaging. But Paul, I'm going to finish, if I may, on just one more point, which is around what COVID has taught us is everything has to move online, but we mustn't forget that there's still digital poverty out there. There are still people that don't have the latest device, that don't consume the rich media, that have bandwidth limitations. So I suppose my closing point is, don't forget that it's got to fill all spectrums. It's got to be leading edge, but you still need to be able to deliver to those devices and those people that aren't quite there yet and may have difficulties accessing your content.
Yeah, well, the Drupal project is heavily invested in inclusion and accessibility. So I think that we can serve very well there. I mean, it's just down to the implementation of a particular website. So yes, it's something I'm a very strong advocate for that. We've only 16 seconds left, gentlemen. So I'd just like to thank you for taking precious time out of your schedules today to join us. And it's been a very illuminating and insightful conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.